So as we've done in the past, we're going to make a recording of this training, which is titled The Good Shepherd Knows His Sheep, Personalities and Teams Part 2. What we're going to do today is some review. We last presented Part 1 2 months ago. Due to fall schedules, summer schedules, we decided to skip a couple of months, so we're picking right up where we left off. There's going to be a time of review. During this hour, I have a TED Talk I want to share with you on the biological basis of personality. And the new content is a quick look at the Myers-Briggs, predominantly to show how it complements the DISC, which we presented earlier. There's a lot of information, which is why we record it. We'll talk about next month's training at the end. There's kind of a flow to things as it goes now. So the first several slides are review, but we're going to tie this all together at the end. Forbes magazine published their view of the 4 great qualities of leaders: the ability to delegate effectively, to communicate in a variety of ways with enthusiasm, which has to do with motivation, and to keep people accountable to accomplish the mission. So delegation, communication, motivation, and accountability is a great leader. All require knowing the people that you lead. Using the metaphor of sheep, you have sheep that are in charge of other sheep, and knowing them well will allow you to help them fulfill their call effectively. We reviewed, took a look at John 10, and mentioned several times that the Good Shepherd knows his sheep. And later in the succession of leadership going to Peter, he references this again and differentiates sheep that are mature versus lambs, and differentiates taking care of and feeding as he's describing these things, which we developed a bit in that session. The body of Christ is a metaphor we're all familiar with. Apostle Paul elaborates on this with particular offices and tasks, and I look at personality as one way of thinking about people with different gifts, different callings, leadings, based on how God wired us and how he's developed us over time for us to fit our roles. And when we talk about personality, we really avoid judgment. We don't want to describe one personality as better than another. It is true that some personalities better fit certain roles, but that does not make them more valuable. In Christ's eyes, we are all sinners saved by grace. We all have equal value, though we are called to different tasks. And so what we're talking about are these different tasks that best fit personality, how to keep people, help people discover, develop, and work together as effective teams for Christ. Your personality is affected by things that happen in your life. I think mine has been shaped by difficult times. And so the life experiences may actually alter the wiring of the brain, particularly when it happens early in life. And we're not going to elaborate much on this, but I believe even the conversion experience coming into the kingdom changes us in ways that make us more fit to do God's calling. And it clearly takes our personalities and rounds them out a little bit, takes some of the rough edges away as we grow and develop in him. I apologize for that. Let me see if I can get this back. I made some kind of sweeping motion with my... Okay, where are you? There we go. I will sometimes err in the direction of bad technology. We talked about the DISC in July, and so what we have here are 4 types of personalities that do combine to make sort of mixes. I'm just going to briefly review this. It's not an intention to teach this for the first time, but to just reflect upon it. The previous teaching can be reviewed, as well as the resources that we've provided or suggested to really study up on this. The dominant personality, the influencer, the steady, and the conscientious. And the basic breakdown is task versus people-oriented and active versus passive. And so this breaks down, and this can be kind of placed in a cube with these dimensions. The dominant individual is task-focused and active, less people-focused, more likely to be active than patient. The influencer, people and active. The steady, people and passive. and the conscientious, task, and passive. So these last two groups, those of you that are dominants or influencers, you need to invite steadies and conscientious to speak. You need to give them time because they're not likely to intrude into the space. This was illustrated really nicely in a TED talk we watched in part one, where Scott Schwefel was talking about this, and they even modeled how you change your tone, you change your pace depending on who you're talking to, if you understand these things and the people that you're with. We talk about strengths of personality type, the dominance, direct, decisive, big pictures, action-oriented. Let's start it, we can clean it up later. The influencers, very social, very active, and the steadies they're the natural listeners, they're naturally friendly, peacemakers, reliable, and the conscientious, precise, perfectionist, independent of thought. Give them a task, they'll complete it without hardly any other motivation. Very different personality types that have weaknesses as well. So again, if you want to look at that TED Talk with Scott Schwefel, where he talks about good red and bad red, because he uses colors to describe these things, and moving from, just to contrast, direct, decisive, self-starter to impatient, insensitive, misses details. He calls it the bad red and the good red. We all are susceptible to our frailty coming out. Same with the influencer, moving from talking, fun, spontaneity, popular approval to impulsive, lacking focus and follow-through. The steadies, moving from peaceful, harmonious, and secure to unassertive, too unassuming, too slow to speak. In other words, if you're not assertive, you're not really sharing fully with the team. We have the conscientious, precise, good detail person, independent, moving into slow to change, to negotiate and let go. And so what we have to do to develop ourselves is to be aware of these things, and how to motivate other people. So you motivate a dominant through, hey, this is a challenge. I need you to step up to the challenge. They're up for that. Give them very specific goals. Give them some kind of reward for accomplishing goals. They're very goal-directed. The influencers, you can motivate them through focusing on that they'll bring fun and spontaneity, and people will love you for what you do. Steadies, we need your steadiness. We need your reliability. You're so important to help us create harmony among the groups, and you will increase our ability to be secure. These are kind of the language when you're trying to motivate and direct. Conscientious people, you praise them for what they know and their high standards, and that you know you can count on them, they'll get it done. So they're just, well, the way we speak to people is directly related to their personality type and what will best motivate them. So at the same time, what is demotivating for these people? When do dominant people get angry if they feel taken advantage of by others? They may fall into, hey, that's not fair, you're not pulling your load. The influencers are afraid of rejection. So this crafts how you talk to them as well. So with an influencer, you want to be careful that you're not saying things that appear critical or judgmental, or that the cost will be loss of relationship. Steadies really want security. And so when you're trying to institute change, you may get some pushback from them because there's always risk with change. They don't like risk. They're risk averse. And the conscientious folks don't like criticism. So you really work at language that we developed in the very first session of Lead Like a Good Shepherd, where we're very objective in our description. We really avoid emotionally tinged words or things that could be interpreted as judgment. And there's always a little more talking to the conscientious types to help them really understand what's going on. They have to have buy-in. And so those things are really important for them. These are things that we developed in more detail in earlier sessions. So media has always used the concept of multiple personality types for entertainment value. And so here are some teams that are presented, and you may be familiar or not with American television and I Love Lucy, and the Seinfeld Show, and Frasier. These are the names of programs represented here. And Ricky was, I think he was Puerto Rican, and very expressive, very talkative, very flamboyant. That's requiring. He actually was a DI, as I think of this, but he was director. He was leader of the band. He was always telling Lucy what she should do. And these were all presented as bad deeds. So Ricky was often misdirecting. Lucy was often flighty and seemingly foolish. Ethel was the peacemaker, and Fred was the old curmudgeon, the old grouchy old man who was always complaining. And so they represented these things. So if you're familiar with this media, it's kind of fun to look at teams and see how they've created a complementary task, a complementary ensemble to accomplish the task of good entertainment. And so the Harry Potter series as well. So those are just some things that exist. In all of our communication, we want to avoid criticism, contempt, and defensiveness. We don't want to create defensiveness, nor do we want to appear deceptive. These three elements come from the work by John Gottman in Marriage. He refers to the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And I've just left off one. It's called stonewalling. So in a marriage relationship, he says that criticism, the expression of contempt, which is putting someone down, you are beneath me, communicating disdain, being defensive yourself or creating defensiveness in the other, which these other two always create. And then the fourth one he has is stonewalling. And he says stonewalling is just a blank response, not giving much. But I just wanted to focus on criticism, contempt, and defensiveness, and that we can avoid this if we understand the personality type and who we're talking to. So the D, I'm a high D. I tend to speak quickly, speak in bullets. I don't give enough information, and I want to be kind of obeyed. And not everybody's into that kind of response. So I need to slow down. I need to be more empathic. I need to focus on the feelings of others. I need to pay attention to how they're processing what I have to say. And that doesn't come naturally, but I can develop it. The I, the influencer. They love to speak, they love to talk, they love to teach, they love for the attention to be on themselves. And a bad I is always talking about him or herself. And you'll pick them out of a crowd at any time. A bad I appears very self-centered. So what the I needs to do, the influencer, is to reduce the volume of speech and listen, which they can do, but they have to think about it because they're much more quick to quickly react and to interject and turn it back to themselves. You'll see this often. The S, or the steady, needs to work to accept change and be more assertive, to develop the ability to speak up when necessary and to accept that life just isn't always stable and sometimes we feel a little insecure. The C, the conscientious person, needs to work to see other perspectives. They give you the strongest pushback when you're suggesting something new. They're the ones that are the slowest to have buy-in. And that's just a process. You need to appreciate they need a little more time, but they also need a little to work at accepting some things. They tend to think the B&W means black and white. They tend to see things as extremes, and they tend to not like things that are not extremes, and they tend to be perceived as judgmental because of that. So good and bad are very clear to them, and they want things to go well from their perspective. So learning about yourself and in my case, what does a good D and a bad D look like, and how can I be more well-rounded so I can communicate well with others and lead them effectively. That's what this slide is about. I have a 16-minute TED Talk I want to show to you. It's going to take me a minute to set it up. And it is, so there's going to be a little activity here on the screen while I get it up. And since I'm going to be doing this anyway for a moment, let me pull up the Enneagram website. And this is what you're going to hear about. And I'm not going to try to teach on this at all. It is a somewhat complex model consisting of 9 different elements. And I just am showing you this because the speaker is going to reference this. And I chose this speaker not so much that she's an expert in the Enneagram, but that's what she's going to refer to, but her research and some of the things she says about self-concept. So I think she has some really good message. We're going to take about 16 minutes to do this. If this isn't working, if you'll text me immediately if I need to adjust something. But so this is a YouTube, and I've given you, we'll post, as we always do, the site, so you can view this and share this with others later. But this is Dr. Tina Thomas. She's a licensed clinical social worker and a PhD in her field. And she has a nursing background as well. So we're going to listen to her for a few minutes here.
Years ago, I serendipitously happened upon a personality system called the Enneagram, although I prefer to use the literal name, the 9-point personality system. When I was first introduced to this system, I was amazed. It was so precise and predictive that I began to believe it must have a biological basis. I went to a conference on personality, and there I met Dr. Eric Schultz. Now, I have to tell you that I was quite smitten by Dr. Schultz because he was drop-dead brilliant. A true genius. And he also had happened upon the system, and he suspected as well that there might be a biological basis to it, so we agreed to be research partners. And we ended up researching a bit more than personality. And at our wedding, we had a cake table and a bar and a blood drawing table as part of our research. They're still talking about that wedding. But we didn't stop there. At our Christmas party that year, we hooked our friends and family up to EEG equipment. Did I mention while we were subjecting them to cold water pain tests? But we didn't get enough of a pain range. So at our 4th of July party, we decided that we would repeat the experiment, but this time at electric shocks. No one comes to my parties anymore. And someone even said that we needed to have our heads examined. So we did. We had SPECT scans of our brain, and I was able to predict which part of our brain would have high and low circulation based on our understanding of personality and brain function, and I was 100% right. Yeah. And it was at that point that we said, yes, indeed, we have cracked the code of human personality. We have discovered the biology of the 9-point personality system. Now, if you've ever wondered about personality, is it something that you're born with, or is it something that's shaped by your experience? The answer is yes to both. Initially, we're born with a set of genes that gives us a personality that can be very different from our parents and our siblings, which in part explains why children with the same parents under the same roof can turn out so very differently. But the plot thickens, because the very personality that you are born with becomes the lens through which you perceive your first 6 years. And it's during that time that you create mental maps, blueprints of who you are and how the world is. And once those maps are set, they become your self-fulfilling prophecy. I'll give you an example. 2 sisters. Betty, the older sister, will describe her childhood this way. Oh my God, it was a wonderful childhood. I mean, mother, she drank a little bit. Father wasn't always there, but Christmas was the best. If you ask her younger sister, Anne, to describe her childhood, this is what you'll get. Oh my God, it was a tragic childhood. Mother was a raging alcoholic, and father abandoned us at a very early age. And Christmas was the worst. Everyone acting happy when we all knew we weren't. Now, you don't have to be Freud to know that those women grew up and had very different outcomes in their life experience. And I believe that the biggest difference wasn't in environment, but in their personality. And if personality can affect the very course of our life, the question becomes, can we affect the course of our personality? And the answer is absolutely yes. And it begins with an understanding of what personality is. So the simplest working definition of personality is how a person thinks, feels, and behaves consistently over time. But we know that as human beings, we're not that consistent. So what we believe creates personality and accounts for the fluctuations in personality lies in neurotransmitters. Now, neurotransmitters are simply chemicals that nerves use to communicate with each other. These chemicals pass from one nerve to the next, and before you know it, a whole chain of communication happens. And at the end of that chain, one of three things will be produced: a thought, a feeling, or an action. Sounds familiar, eh? Well, it gets even juicier, because if you were to cut a human brain open and stain it, you would find that there are three main neurotransmitter pathways. Each one begins in a specific part of the brain and then branches out, much like these trees. And each one of these neurotransmitters is driven by a single neurotransmitter. You have norepinephrine that regulates how we think, serotonin that regulates how we feel, and dopamine that regulates how we behave. And part of my theory on personality is that what we call personality is simply the high, medium, and low combinations of those neurotransmitters, the set points of those neurotransmitters, and that those set points actually rise and fall a bit, just like your blood pressure does under various conditions. I'm just going to brief you on the two first chemicals, norepinephrine and serotonin, that make up what we call your basic personality. Let's begin with norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is considered a brain adrenaline. So people who have high set points of norepinephrine are the kind of people who think quickly and speak quickly, and they'll often report that they have a hard time turning their brain off at night. People who have a low set point are going to be the kind of people who hit the pillow and they tend to not overthink, they tend to speak slowly, and they really rely on their gut to make decisions. And people who have an average set point, well, kind of fall in the middle, where they're actively problem solving and then daydreaming, actively problem solving and daydreaming throughout the day. Now, there are many factors that increase norepinephrine. I'm just going to give you a few examples of the big guys. Stress, sensory overload, and caffeine will all kickstart your brain and get it swirling. And factors that decrease norepinephrine include repetitive muscle movement, just like walking or jogging or even gum chewing. And then there's a neurotransmitter known as GABA, and it inhibits the effect of norepinephrine. And then you guys are going to like this one: orgasms. Now, I'm not giving you homework. I'm just reporting the facts. So let's move on to serotonin. Sunny serotonin is the neurotransmitter that's related to well-being. People who are high in serotonin don't have to try to be positive. They don't have to remember to look at the half-full glass. No, these people are born with rose-colored glasses. And people who are born with low set point of serotonin are called reactive, which means that they experience and respond more intensely than most of us, and generally have a temper and or anxiety. And people who are born with an average set point, well, we call those people emotionally neutral. Now, factors that decrease serotonin include stress, pain, and fatigue. And I'd like you all to remember this, because whenever you experience stress, pain, and fatigue and your serotonin levels drop, it makes you more susceptible to stress, pain, and fatigue. But luckily, there are more factors that help to increase serotonin than there are to decrease them. And those factors include carbohydrates, which is why we crave carbohydrates under stress. Also happy music, antidepressants, and kindness. Kindness boosts serotonin levels in both the giver and the receiver. And when all else fails, there's always chocolate. So let's go back to the basic personality. Let's take the high, medium, and low possibilities and combinations of norepinephrine and combine them with the high, medium, and low combinations of serotonin. Mathematically, what you'll get from that are 9 possible combinations. And those possible combinations will yield 9 basic human personalities. Each one of these personalities has a very specific viewpoint, a very specific motivation, a very specific language. Did you know that there are nearly 7,000 recognized languages in the world? Well, I'm here to tell you that I believe if you understand all of these personality types, then you will become fluent in music. Now, you see that symbol in the middle? That is not a satanic sign. That is actually a map that shows you the direction of integration or disintegration. That is, which personality type will temporarily visit another personality type under optimal conditions or stress conditions. And when you really understand this system, the biology of it, you'll come to understand that we're all just 1 or 2 steps away from any personality type, which means that essentially we have all personality types within us. Very much like a radio that has all of the channels. You know, you hang out at your favorite radio station, sort of your set point, but you can visit other stations. And in the very same way, we believe that you can visit other personality types. Now, it turns out that Don Risso and Russ Hudson, 2 of the world leaders in the study of the Enneagram, started observing this 9-point personality system, and they noticed that not only do people move from one personality type to the other, but that actually within each type, we have various levels of health, high, medium, and low functioning within each of us. And when they made that discovery, they transformed this fluid but flat system into a 3-dimensional dynamic system, which is as simple or as complex and rich as the humans it seems to map. Now I'm going to give you an example of how when you combine 2 of these neurotransmitters, you can get very different types of personalities. Let's take an example of high norepinephrine and couple that with average serotonin. So what you're going to get is a person who's thinking very quickly, but with emotionally neutral thoughts. So this person is going to be thinking like, what makes that work? How does that happen? How do I fix that? And what you're going to get from that combination is the 5th of the 9 personalities, known as the thinker or the observer, also known as the nerd. A high example of this personality type, Albert Einstein. And a low-functioning example, the Unabomber. Quite the range, don't you think? Do you notice something that they have in common? The hair, exactly. Well, one of the reasons that they have that in common is because this personality type is wired to not be concerned or constrained by social convention. So they don't care what you think about them. And that's why they are some of the most original thinkers in the world, because they have that internal permission to think outside of the box. Let's take another example. What happens when you combine low norepinephrine with low serotonin? Well, you're going to get somebody who doesn't think that much. Not going to overthink, but they will react. And when you put that combination together, you get the 8 personality, known as the boss or the leader. This is a very direct person, very straightforward person. My way or the highway, make it happen, do or die. An average example, John Wayne. Low functioning, Saddam Hussein. And 8 gone bad. He took that same energy of leadership, that same strength, but used it to bully people instead of to protect them, which is a good reason to be nice to your kids. Speaking of kids, I used to have a pet pig. Her name was Peggy Suey. I really loved Peggy, and I would go to pet her, and she would run away squealing. And then she developed this annoying habit of butting my ankles. I was very distressed by this, and I eventually learned that pigs do not like to be approached from above because it feels like a predator coming down on them. They actually prefer if you pet their chinny chin chin. And that butting of my ankles, that was her way of saying she liked me. Aww. So here we were, 2 sentient beings, really crazy about each other, but driving each other crazy because we weren't speaking the same language. And then I thought about people. I can't tell you how many times, in the name of love, I have seen parents trying to impose their personality viewpoint, their personality values on their children who sometimes did not have the same personality and who were wired very differently. And these children grew up to be adults who were perfectly fine people who felt like something was really wrong with them. I have a vision for the future. One day, it's my fantasy that when a baby is born, we'll give the parents the child's personality from the blood test. And then we'll add a little booklet, a little instruction manual that explains the care and feeding of this personality. But until then, because that could be a long time off, if you're a researcher or an educator or a parent or simply someone who wants to be a better person, please consider learning about this system and using it as a tool to improve yourself and your relationships. Because from your personal relationships, you're only one step away from the workplace. And from the workplace, we're only one step away from the community. And from the community, we're only one step away from the world. And I know that sounds grand, but I'm a grandmother of two very special human beings, Caleb Thomas and Scout Amanda. And I really want them to live in a world where we get along and where we embrace our differences and where we finally understand that even with all of our differences, in the end, in so many more ways, we are all the same.
So I wanted us to watch this, not that we could possibly in a few minutes, but to hear her talk about biologically based research and brain measurable correlates or things that suggest functional personality variable differences. And this is a difficult field of study, and so almost anyone who is an expert in this area that would watch someone else presenting would argue various points of their research, their findings, and so on. But we're moving in this direction to where we should be able to predict how a person processes information, feels, reacts based on biological markers as well as conclusions we make from interacting with them. So it's a very, very interesting area. The Enneagram Institute website that I showed you a minute ago is really interesting from the standpoint of a party game. So if you take this test, the Ready Now, for example, and that isn't the one we take. Okay, there are free ones. I'm sorry, I hadn't thought this through well enough. You have to actually pay to take this one, but if you just look at the Enneagram, there's a really good free one. It's about 20 items. And Chris, at this a recent family event, everybody took it, and we had some very interesting conversation as we, several of us not really well versed in it, just sort of explored what it said. And the fun of it was I wasn't an expert in it, so everybody was just sharing ideas. Very interesting conversation as we identified strengths, weaknesses, how we are at our best. You know, she referenced John Wayne and Saddam Hussein. Scott Schweffel would have said, you know, good red, bad red. These are useful things to think about, and can just talking about them increases relationship. And so when you're doing team building, I always include some discussion of personality. Always. When I first took a team to New York after 9/11, I did a personality inventory, a stress inventory, and so part of my training was figuring out and actually training them. So this is where you are most comfortable. This is where you are most distressed, and also for selection of role, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute. So I wanted the biological exposure. I wanted to hear another expert talk about the need to understand each other. Her little pig story. We were speaking a different language. We have to understand each other to communicate better. And her vision that if we could increase the understanding of groups of people, we might have a more peaceful world. I actually think that is something to hope for. So, besides this presentation, the new content I want to introduce is a quick exposure to the Myers-Briggs temperament inventory. If you took the one that we sent out in an email, or if you want to take one, there are some free ones, and Mirabella can resend out the links to take the Jungian temperament survey, which is short and free. And there are 4 pairs, and so it's a little more complex, and I'm not going to try to teach it all today. I'm really going to use this more illustratively and talk about some groupings. But the 4 pairs are introversion versus extroversion, and I think most of you are familiar with that. The introvert is more inward processing, needs time alone to process, to rejuvenate, prefers in a social world to have a role, to have structure. The extrovert prefers to charge batteries in relationship with other people. I have a friend who's an extreme extrovert, and I'm quite an introvert. So we were talking about this difference, and I said, the introvert doesn't always feel socially competent or confident, doesn't always expect positive interaction. He got this shocked look on his face. He said, I can't imagine somebody not wanting to talk to me. And that's the extreme extrovert. Anybody I meet is my friend, very positive expectation for social interaction. The extreme introvert is very shy, very reticent. And so if you're an extreme at either end, you have to learn that there are people different than you and create the capacity to relate to different people. Sensing and intuitive, the words get very confusing. The sensor is more concrete in function, likes dealing with things and familiar systems, whereas the intuitive likes the world of thought, models, possibilities, the future. So I'm going to use my wife and I to illustrate this as we go through. My wife's an extrovert and I'm an introvert. The extrovert is looking forward to a social event. The introvert is saying, when are we going to get to leave? I've only got so much energy. I have to pace myself. So if it's a 3-hour, it's a 4-hour. The extrovert's saying, what are you talking about? I might be just warming up in 3 hours. I don't know when I want to leave. And this is an issue we've had to work out in our relationship. My wife is a sensor. I'm an intuitive. I'm always thinking about new things, new ideas. I love the world of thought. A great conversation for me is theoretical. Becky is sensing. So she likes to gain a certain level of expertise and then repeat it. We did marriage workshops for 2 decades because she is a sustainer of activity. By the time I master something, I'm done with it. I'm on to the next thing. So we're very different in those ways. Feeler and thinker. My wife is a feeler. She prefers to make decisions based on the social impact. I prefer to make decisions as a thinker based on factual matter. So as an INTJ, we're both Js, I am very mission focused. I will do everything it takes to accomplish the mission. As an ESFJ, Becky is very socially focused. She will do everything it takes to maintain harmony, and she loves security, stability, predictability. We're very different. We have to work to understand each other, or we will have problems. I have a son who's an INFP. He's different than either of us in the perceiving range. Judgers like a plan. They feel anxious until there is a plan. Perceivers feel anxious when forced to make a decision. They like to keep their options open. An extreme example of this is my several people in my wife's family have P as that 4th letter. My sister-in-law is an introvert. She's sensing and thinking, and she's a perceiver. And before she had children, she's a few years younger than Becky, we would visit their home, and she would say, what would you like for dinner tonight? We'll go to the store and get it. Which my wife found offensive. She's like, oh, wait a minute, you've known we're coming for weeks. You didn't plan? You didn't go out and purchase? You don't already have a menu established? That's the difference between the judger who wants that plan and the P that, let's see what we feel like. And they can drive each other crazy interacting with each other. So these are the 4 pairs. And what I want to focus on is the internal section. I think it's kind of easy to understand introverted, extroverted, and judging and perceiving. So these mixes are what bring color and difference and variety to the Jungian pairs. So My wife is an SF, very steady, likable person, because she works to be likable. She doesn't have to work at it. She naturally is likable, peace-seeing, people-focused. People love talking to her. The SFs are the great listeners. She also is an S, high S, medium I on the disc. You can see how these things start blending together. The ST is typically a middle management kind of person. Steady sustainer, do it right, rule focused. They don't mind creating conflict. They don't mind telling you that you're wrong. Get in line. They tend to be more mission. So if you compare this to the disc, the SF is more people. The ST is more task. The SF is more passive. The ST is more active. So those same dimensions, you can see how this overlaps. NFs are people focused, but that N gives them an analytical basis so that they can also be highly theoretical. They tend to be artistic. My eldest son is an introvert, NFP, and he is artistic. He's gotten all the artistic genes from everywhere, so musicianship, visual arts, and what does he want to do? He wants to be involved in media. He is out in LA. He's working for Warner Brothers in casting. His goal is to write television. He wants to get on a writer's team, and he wants to work in the secular world, and he wants to influence TV in the direction of the gospel. He has no grandiose ideas about going to Hollywood and making it the center of Christian media. But he wants to be salt and light in a dark world, and he wants to influence content to better reflect the character of God himself. And so it's a grandiose and marvelous vision. We pray that the Lord, empowers him to move in that direction. But that's the artist, INFP. I have one son who's an INTJ, and another who is leaning that direction because of his work. Your environment can change who you are. The NT, I am an NT, visionary, really likes variety, likes the thought of new things, likes seeing what could be and working to make that happen. And I have to be careful when I lecture because I could create models that are too complex. I've learned that about me, and so what I've learned is to kind of reverse engineer things and take complex things and make them easier to understand. I know I'm presenting a lot of content in 1 hour, so it may seem like I'm, you've heard the drinking out of a fire hose metaphor. That's kind of how these trainings have been. I've been trying to put a lot of content in 1 hour with your option of exploring those things further with resources and recording these things so you can look at them again. And I've also have been envisioned providing different content month by month, so there's a lot in this. But I do have the capacity to kind of simplify things and make them easy to digest. So those are the 4 pairs. And I know this is a really brief introduction, but you can research this further if it interests you. So how do I use the 2 together? Why go to all the trouble of learning more than one model of personality? Well, it's because one doesn't capture everything. People are so complex. Behavior is so rich. Language is so wonderful. So I think it's easiest to start with the disc if you're just getting used to this, because you're dealing with 4 basic constructs and it's fewer. You go to the Enneagram and you have 9. If you add the wings and the disintegration concept, you're looking at a large number of variables. With the Myers-Briggs, you're looking at 16 distinct pairing types. So they get more complex. But for example, if you recall Scott Schwefel's talk on the disc, and if you haven't seen it, you can easily go look up the reference. He's on YouTube. It's a 16-minute YouTube. He lumps energy with introverted and extroverted, and he puts the dominant driver and the influencer in the extroverted, and the sensing, the sustainer cautious, the steady cautious as introverted. And I can introduce you to a lot of people who are dominant drivers who are introverted. And I can introduce you to my wife, who's clearly a steady, and she's wildly extroverted. So when we try to oversimplify one model and try to cover all the bases, we end up missing things. So I find that, in particular, the introversion-extroversion component, which is why I mentioned it here, the introverted dominant driver needs to do activity alone. So we're action-oriented, so I like to exercise, but I want to do it alone. I want to run, I want to bike, I want to swim, I want to have my headphones on and listen to my own space. The extroverted dominant driver wants to be active, and so he wants to play tennis with somebody. He wants to play squash with somebody. He wants to be on a team sport. My son Jeremy, very athletic. I didn't inherit any athletic genes. He inherited a whole bunch of them. And so he can run, and soccer was his game, running and active, and he was quick and accurate. Um, but he wouldn't have done track and field where you run alone. Had no appeal to him at all. He has since developed more of a tolerance for that, but he still prefers a team activity. So introversion, extroversion, I think, is really important, as is the judging and perceiving. A dominant driver who's a perceiver has real difficulty organizing self to get things done. So these are things to be aware of. And so I use them to complement and clarify. So I've already mentioned Becky and I. And we are different in the disc. In the early years when I was taking the disc, I measured as a DC. And if you hear me talk about my life, there was a need for God to move me, and lately more DI. Um, I am getting less organized as I go along. Becky, a strong SI with very little of the DC, so she's totally social. And whereas I am much more mission, and have become, because of my role, more people directed. But you can see in the INTJ and the ESFJ differing in 3 dimensions. And it is very true that opposites attract. It is true. And complementary brings a sense of completeness. But we have to work together. And taking this concept to the teams that you build, whether it be a team of staff or a team of volunteers, or you're trying to do some community outreach and you're drawing from different organizations, different people, this awareness of who fits what role, how do I talk to them, makes all the difference. And those of you that do it naturally find it easier to get people to follow you. Those of us like me that really have to work at this, people sometimes just don't get what I'm telling them unless I speak their language. So these are all very important things. So I'm going back to our very first slide where Forbes magazine said that delegation, communication, motivation or enthusiasm, and accountability are important qualities for leaders. And I'm just throwing in where I think they become really important. And so if you're building a team, you have to have some way of selecting people for your team. And unfortunately, in small organizations, it's kind of like, well, whoever's here is going to fill the role, whether they fit or not. So you've heard the old metaphor, like putting a round peg in a square hole. It can very much feel like that as people are trying to fill various roles. So this part of when I'm hiring now, whatever their role, I give them a little personality test. I want to know, even from the very first interviews, how do I talk with them? How do I help them feel welcome? Because when you're bringing somebody into your organization, impressions are formed very quickly. Impressions of you as a leader of your organization. And with a little planning, you can craft, and it isn't manipulative. It's not trying to get people to do something that's bad for them. It's really just being intentional about welcoming people and speaking their language. So selection and training, and even your method of training. My preferred training is leave me alone. Give me a book, give me a video, let me crank through this thing. When I'm doing continuing education training, I've been in the field long enough, and I have to do 15 hours a year. I may get to the end of the year and, I'm missing a couple. I'll purchase a couple online trainings, and if at all possible, I go right to the end, take the test, and then I go back and find which ones I missed. I want to do it alone. I don't want to interact with people. Now, a strong extrovert will learn best with the motivational component of the group. And so I find it a distraction. Someone else finds it absolutely necessary. So my wife would much rather sit in a group of people discussing things, hearing how you feel about it, what's your perception. Give me the facts, let me learn this stuff, let me get out of here. That's 2 very, very different kinds of things. Communication, we've been talking about. That if I can speak your language, for example, we have friends online who are from Romania. They're listening in English. They're having to work. They have to take the things that I naturally say from my culture that are not even normal English. They have to figure out, how is this? So if I had crafted my talk more carefully and made sure that my language was more basic English, not Americanisms, it'd be easy for them to understand. Or if I could even speak Romanian, I could take the complex constructs and speak them out. Taking that as a metaphor, it's the same thing. When I talk about what I think to a strong feeler, they have to process it through their emotional sense of being. And when they talk about what they feel, I have to process it differently, but we can learn to get along and communicate. Enthusiasm and motivation, absolutely different things. An earlier slide, which was a review, high Ds, motivate them with challenge, not S's, not C's, high Ds. Um, Accuracy, the love of perfection, high C's. So even crafting their place in the organization, the tasks that they function with regularly, and how you give them praise makes a difference. And accountability, similarly. If you tell a high D, here's the standard, here's where I want it done, you don't really have to look after them much. The high I's, yes. If you send them off on a task and it isn't what they love doing, you have to come back around and remind them a little bit. So determining the amount of accountability with the personality type makes a big difference. Every organization that I've been part of, that I've worked with, having an intentional way of understanding people and communicating effectively has been a big part of value for them. So in terms of personality and selection, do I focus on mission? I had a friend that knew me very well. He came to me and said, I have a job for you. You're going to work really, really hard at it, and you're going to love it. And I said, I'm in. I don't challenges. He spoke my language. You're going to work really hard, and you're going to love it. He was asking me to be a worship leader in a conference that we presented, and I did. I loved it. It was fun. It was a lot of work. Are we dealing with fact versus feeling? The driver, the conscientious, fact-based. So you put them in jobs where they're dealing with these sort of things if you can. So I want my surgeon to be a high C. I want my surgeon to be perfectionist. I want him to be very consistent. I don't want him doing anything different in my surgery than he did in the 3,000 successful surgeries before. I think I might have shared this story before. I was asked to evaluate a surgeon who'd had 2 bad outcomes. He was a surgeon, and he fixes rotator cuffs. And over a 5-year span, he did 2 on the wrong side. Not good. And so he was sent for evaluation the first time, and then I happened to see him after the second one. And what had happened was he had been asked to make change. You can't use this operating theater, you have to use this one. And so this high C personality had to change and adjust, had a different staff, different setup, and he messed up. When he told me what his procedure was for every surgery, I just had him talk through. I said, I want him doing my surgery. He had every simple nuance of this thing. And so the conclusion that we came from was it wasn't out of lack of motivation. He wasn't incompetent. It's that he has to learn to say no if anything is going to interrupt his schedule. He has to be willing to say, I'm not doing it. We're going to delay this. We're going to do it then. That was really the main conclusion, that he needed to not be distracted from his normal routine. So fact versus feeling, vision versus implementation. You only need one visionary on a team. I'm doing a consultation with a group, and he was talking about the makeup of his team. And he had wanted to put under him another visionary. And I said, no, you don't want to do that. You don't want another visionary to implement for you. This person's always going to be telling you another way to do it. And they're always going to come up with a way they think is better. Too much conflict. This person was an NT, and I said, we want to use this person who is an ST, who will see the mission through. I'm using the Myers-Briggs vernacular here. He will see the mission through. He will complete this for you. So who should be the implementers and who should be the visionaries? Who will complete the goal versus nurture the team? So I put my wife in charge of the group. She's an SF, she's an S. And I know I'm throwing this out real fast, but if you go back and review the content, I think you'll see how this fits. So I will say, I want you to keep track of the room while I'm giving this talk. And I want you to interrupt me if you feel like they're detaching. And we have our way of doing this. So if you feel like they're detaching, I want you to just interrupt what I'm doing and insert yourself. And so I threw this up here just as an example for those of you that have an organization that has a greeter, for example. That's your high I. Welcome. Nice to see you. They love incorporating people. Your accountant, you want a high C on the disc. You want them to be a perfectionist. Teachers, high I's make great high I's, but everybody can teach their way. And so these were just some things I wanted to show out there, show you as you're feeling a team. Who are they leading? Who would be the best person to lead? And what would be the most efficient system we could create? I already kind of talked about this. I often get away from my slides because I forget which slides are coming and just kind of wing it. A high C would never do that. My wife would never do that. Sustainers don't do that. But visionaries and high Ds will just do it. So there are times when my slides are sort of catching up. So I've already referenced how some people want group versus individual versus totally independent training. And the more high D, the faster they want to be trained. The more the introverted, the more individual. The more extroverted, the more group, and so on. With me, it is absolutely deadly to have to go through the same content twice. Then under maintaining attention, I take notes a lot simply to make myself pay attention, because as soon as I think I know something, I'm likely to disengage. Now, I might be wrong. I might miss some real critical, important, but I have to work to overcome normal educational processes, because normally you want to present something, repeat it, practice it, and so on. Once that's in my head, I don't want to do it. I have to know myself. And when I'm teaching, I watch the crowd, and if I find people disengaging, I try to do something to stir up the ability to focus on the front. And then we've talked about the difference between people that love facts. I love theory. I love facts. My wife loves to hear stories about lives and people's feelings and stuff. And I love theoretical stuff. Whereas you, if you're an SF or you're a C, or you might love the application. So again, I'm just kind of giving you samples of things that we can attend to. And even giving compliments. You've done a great job. I'm really happy with what you've produced. That could be a C on the disc. Conscientious person, a perfectionist, they want to know they're doing well. It could be a D. It could be anybody, but there are certain ones that really hit. Good friend is the S, is the Myers-Briggs SF. The relational component you bring to this is really, really wonderful. Your visionaries want to know that they're impacting the future. You know what? I think 2 years from now, we could have really accomplished something. That just makes my heart burst with pride that I've impacted the future, which is impacting me now as someone in his 60s. Most of my focus is thinking about how am I impacting the next generation and the next generation. My whole view of a good last 3 or 4 decades of my life is different than someone who is more interested in just having peaceful experiences and looking forward to just being able to relax. Personality differences. I can really count on you. That's the high C. You know what? I'm really depending on you to make this thing more efficient. Good time saver. That's a high D. And so even how we speak, if we think about it, we can be more effective at motivating, at encouraging, being encouragers. So if you're talking to a high D and you don't say they did a good job, if you say, I really like working with you, they'll be thinking like, okay, so you're trying to tell me I'm okay, but I really didn't do well. It's that kind of reaction using different kinds of things. So as far as resources, what to do with this stuff, I've given you in the last 2 meetings a ton of information, and we'll post this on the website so that you can look up these issues. I find the Global Summit, 4 points down, always really useful. Look forward to getting either videos or that. I don't know when it is in Romania. I know it's not August, but in the United States it's in August. Please Understand Me can be purchased from Amazon.com. That's Myers-Briggs, really good book. Understand How Others Misunderstand You. That's a Christian book. References Christian characters. Really interesting. Lead Like Jesus. Ken Blanchard, author of 1 Minute Manager. Great author, great speaker. The Gift of Being Yourself is a little different in that it's David Benner, who's a psychologist, spiritual direction expert. So he's not talking so much about personality as about identity. Really good book. Leading Minds by Richard Gardner, a secular book that looks at a bunch of characters and how they led. Jesus, Gandhi, Buddha, Eleanor Roosevelt, uh, Helen Kapler Singer. These are people that he talks about, and assertiveness is something we all need to work on. Best book on it. What are we going to do next month? Um, um, we are going to do The Good Shepherd Protects the Sheep. That's my plan. John 10 talks about thieves and wolves. And so I'm going to talk about people who don't think the same as other people. They're not motivated the same as other people. I'm going to talk about evil people, people who are aligned with destruction. And I'm going to talk about personality disorders, who are people who aren't evil, but they will appear as fools. I'm going to use some metaphors used by Dan Allender in his book Bold Love, and we're going to look at thieves and wolves. And I think you'll find it a very interesting presentation. Before we go, I wanted to let you know that we have a new website under construction. This is the Eden Leaders Institute, edenleaders.com. And it's just under construction, so all we have is the beginnings of it. But it does introduce some of our services that we offer, clinical intensives, counseling and coaching intensives, training, including what we're doing here. My core team members, myself, my wife, my good friend Tom Nolan, Dr. Richard Kidd, Bob Groves, they're part of the Eden coaching and consulting team. We do work as a team. We have several clients we're working with. And we really do believe this. All change comes from deepening your understanding of the salvation of Christ and living out the change that understanding creates in your heart. And so feel free to look at that. I've shown you really the whole thing now. It's under construction. Mirabella and her team at C3 Solutions are building it for us. So you're going to get a survey from us. It should be released now. And if you'd fill that out and give me feedback as to the content and the accessibility, the quality of presentation, what you think about the next ideas I'm presenting, let us know what you think, and it will shape what we do. Next month, it's the fourth Thursday. I have an activity I have to do on the third Thursday, so I wanted to mention that. And that's the content. So we're signing out for today. Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate you being there. I didn't get a chance to greet you all. Oh, my son Eric was on there. Did you hear me talking about you? And Kinga, welcome, welcome. I don't think you've been on this before. This is great. Bill. So these are.
Hello. Sorry for joining so late.
That's okay. So we're gonna sign out. You all have a great day. We'll see you next month. Take care.